Can we please welcome to the Babar Bar stage the wonderful David Bramwell, who's going to talk about Outlandish.
I'm going to start with a story. And if you recognize the story, don't tell me yet, or don't tell us yet. Waldo Jeffers is a lovesick student back home in Locust, Pennsylvania, during the summer holidays. With his college sweetheart, Marcia Bronson, living in Wisconsin, Jeffers is having to endure the pains of a long-distance love affair, while also growing anxious about his girlfriend's fidelity. Surrendering to a growing paranoia that Bronson might not stay faithful to him, but without the necessary funds to travel to Wisconsin, Jeffers hatches a plan to have himself delivered in a large cardboard box to Bronson's house as a surprise. When he arrives 3 days later, Bronson and her friend Sheila attempt to open the mysterious box, but finding it tightly sealed, resort to using a metal cutter. Unhappily for Waldo, his head is split open like a melon. If you know that story, we'll come back to that, okay? We're going to come back to that. So it's always a tricky one when you've got a book out and you think, I'd like to go and give some talks based around the book without being that twat who's got a book out who wants to talk about his book. So I asked myself, what's in it for you, the audience? And I imagine I'm not alone in this room as being someone trying to make a living as a freelancer, trying to make a living as a creative, for want of a better word. And you might have read or been told that writers, successful writers at least, make a living out of their writing. This just isn't true. So someone like J.K. Rowling, is on a sort of different level. But most professional writers, if you pick up a newspaper, you might see writing masterclasses, and you'll know the names of all those authors running those masterclasses. Those masterclasses are often themed around the question, how do I make a living as a writer? And the answer is, you run a masterclass themed around how do I make, and then when you become you get, I know, I need to do that. So that is how it works, really. You don't make enough money, particularly in non-fiction, which is my speciality. You don't make enough money in book sales. You make embarrassingly small amounts of money unless you're extremely lucky. So 25 years ago, I sort of accidentally started a publishing company with a couple of, I was going to say a couple of friends, with an ex-partner and a Canadian we met in the street, who we happened to mention that we were thinking of writing a guidebook to Brighton, and he went, that sounds like quite a good idea. And he turned out to be a complete dick. But he's now a millionaire because he was obsessed. I wasn't going to mention this. Keep an eye on the time. He was obsessed with Sting, and so actually putting our first book together, I just had to listen to. He had the world's second largest collection of bootleg Sting live CDs, about 2,000 of them, and I used to listen to this. And he would tell me all about how much he loved Sting, and once Sting touched one of our books, and I think that was his happiest day. And now he's the tour manager for Sting's trumpet player, Chris Botti, so he gets to see quite a lot of Sting. Anyway, don't know why I'm telling you that. So back in 1999, started this company. This was in the days when you could, as a bookseller, you could take books into bookshops and actually sell them to the book. I know that sounds crazy, but you could just carry in a box of books and they'll give you money for them. And you could give them a box of, say, 64 books if they thought it was going to sell like a guidebook. Whereas nowadays everything's computerized and the system will automatically order one book if it's feeling generous and wait for that to come. And you can't have a best-selling book locally anymore. Everything has to be homogenized. So we made good money out of selling guidebooks in the early days, and then it all kind of dwindled. So I was doing I did a job for 20 years that I didn't really enjoy, and wanted to escape from that job. But I knew that as a writer, if I started doing jobs that compromised my love of writing, then I'd end up becoming one of those, I'd just be replacing a job I didn't like for another job that I didn't like. And this was something that someone had said to me early on in my life, that really stick with writing what you like, no matter how niche it is. If you want to create stuff, then at least make it something that comes from your heart and your soul. And I always remembered this and thought about this. And one of the areas that you can potentially move into as a writer is writing for magazines, writing for newspapers. Now, as we all know, most of our newspapers are owned by bigoted right-wing billionaires and millionaires. Didn't want to write for any of those and do a Faustian pact with the devil. All I wanted to do really was kind of write travel stuff, but I was interested in alternative aspects of travel. I didn't want to write about hiking in Cheshire, right? I thought if I was going to write for The Guardian, I'd like to write weird stuff, alternative journeys and adventures. And as a consequence, my emails were never replied to by The Guardian over the years that I submitted idea after idea after idea. And then I just gave up on it and thought, no one's ever going to respond to these, never take me seriously. And so I continued in my job. And then this happened. Some of you will remember it. And what that meant was that during the pandemic, there were no travel stories. And my friend Dixie Wills, who's a travel writer, he phoned me up at the beginning of the pandemic, and he said, "Have you got any travel stories?" And I said, "Well, I do have some. I've been researching some stories on the theme of travel, but alternative stories, not the kind of stuff that The Guardian would like." And he went, "They're pretty desperate right now because there aren't any travel stories." And he said, "Will you put a pitch together?" So I pitched a couple of ideas. And then at the last minute, I didn't send them because I'd been in this situation so many times. I did the work, and then I just bottled it. And Dixie phoned me up on the Monday morning and said, "This never happens." The editor of The Guardian phoned me up and said, "Your mate," who he didn't know, "your mate hasn't sent his proposal through." And Dixie went, "You should do it." So I sent a proposal, and they liked it, and they published it. And it was a bit of a gift of a story that I'd been researching. And it went out on the 25th of April under China holidays, right, during lockdown, right? And it was the story of Marina Abramovich. So I'm hoping most of you know who Marina Abramovich is. She's kind of a superstar performance artist. She's very, very successful now. She's very, very rich and recently launched her own unique brand of health drinks, which are $100 per bottle. She's that successful now and that far away from reality. But so this was a gift of a story. And the reason it was a gift of a story was connected with the pandemic and the 2-meter rule. So, and the story was very well received as well. So if you don't know the story, back in the early 80s, Marina Abramovich was engaged to another performance artist called Ule. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. And they did these sort of avant-garde performances together where they would, I don't know, they'd be in an art gallery and they slap each other across the face for 8 hours, or he would hold a bow and arrow in front of a heart for 3 hours, that kind of thing, you know. And they decided that as a symbol of their profound love for each other, they would walk from opposite ends of the Great Wall of China, and when they met in the middle, they'd get married. Beautiful. And so they wrote to the Chinese authorities in the early 80s and said, could we do this? 8 years passed where the bureaucracy, the red tape, the correspondence just went back and forth. Sometimes they said yes, then they changed their minds, then there was another stipulation, another thing that needed to be added to the contract. By the time the Chinese authorities had finally agreed, they'd split up. But they decided to do it anyway, and then meet in the middle, and then officially split up. So rather than get married, actually properly just like, fuck off, I hate you, and like, do that, you know. So that's what they did. And I can't remember, was it 2 months or something that the two of them walked from opposite ends. And some of it was filmed for a Chinese TV channel. And when they met in the middle, they had a bit of a hug and a kiss. And then they actually bickered over something. He made her cry. He made some acerbic comment about her shoes. And then they split up and they never saw each other again for 25 years. That's properly splitting up, isn't it? And what happened in 2010 many of you will have seen this, I'm sure, is Abramovich started to become the superstar she is now through a show called The Artist is Present, where I think it was in MoMA in New York. She sat in that chair in a red dress for a few weeks, and if you were lucky enough, you could sit in the chair opposite. That was it. And there were huge queues, and there were no rules as to how long a person could sit there or how they presented themselves. So some people stripped off. Some people sat there for the whole day, even though there was a queue of 100 people waiting, expecting that people would be respectful and do their 2 minutes with Marina, but some people didn't. And the story that captured the hearts and the imaginations of the world was when Ule decided to go and be part of The Artist is Present. And he sat there. And Marina would always have her eyes closed before the next person came up. I think she was working out her profits for the day from the sales and things. But I'm being a bit cynical about Marina, I'm sorry. So Ule comes and he sits there. And they're 2 meters apart, and this was her rule, was the person sits 2 meters away and there's no physical contact and they have to stay there, which is why it was a bit of a gift of a story for lockdown. And she opens her eyes and she sees Ule, and her eyes fill up with tears. His eyes fill up with tears. They haven't seen each other for all this time. And then she breaks her own protocol and they touch. And it was a very touching story to write about, because we were in a predicament where we couldn't reach out and touch and be close to our loved ones. Many of us were in that situation. And so this seemed a very poignant story, that this moment will end, this time will pass. And it has passed, and it feels like a distant memory, I'm sure, for most of us. So this story went out. I wrote a couple of others. And then the editor of Guardian Travel phoned up and said, would you like to have your own column in the newspaper? This was a dream come true for me. And I said yes. And he said, what do you fancy? And I said, let's call it Weird World, and just let me write about weird shit. And he went, okay. So that happened. So I got to write about strange lights in the sky, about how Milton Keynes is the new Stonehenge, independent UK islands, the fact that Andy Warhol's penis is on the moon, that's a story for another time, and all that kind of stuff, right? A giant church in Java in the shape of a chicken. And of course, when lockdown ended, they took it away from me because people were traveling again. So I did a lot of research into alternative journeys, and I thought a lot about the ways that we travel. I thought about confinement. I researched the story of Albert Speer, who was incorrectly dubbed the good Nazi, but he was incarcerated in Spandau for 20 years and decided to walk around the world, which for him meant walking around the vegetable garden that he'd been working on, and calculating if he walked around it, say, 100 times a day, how far that would be. And then he got guidebooks and information from the library there and worked out how long it would take him to walk around the world. So he walked from Spandau to Mexico over the space of 12 years, I think it was, about 33,000 miles, which at times, if you read his diaries, it feels like he's lost himself in that walk to kind of escape from his predicament and probably not face up to the horrors and atrocities which he was certainly a part of. And I contrasted that with the story of Xavier de Maistre, who was a French nobleman who had fled France during the Revolution and gone to Italy, took part in an illegal duel, and was confined to his bedroom for 6 weeks. And he wrote a book about this called A Journey Around My Room, which is very funny. He overuses exclamation marks, but he talks about the journey from his chaise longue to his bureau, and from his bureau to his bed. And all of these take several chapters. He's got a lot of time on his hands, and he, in contrast to Speer, he's very introspective. And so these were the things that I was researching. in the past 6 years, I've had the misfortune of having a fantastic literary agent, and that was the most miserable year of my life. I had 3 books published with a major publishing company. Those were pretty miserable years. And also, in case you don't know this, authors get less than 10% of the value of a book when it goes on sale. Just to sell a book on Amazon, even if you're selling the book yourself, Amazon take 50% just for the book being present on that website. Bookshops, more understandably, kind of take up to 60%. Your agent will take 15 to 20%, and you will get probably about 5% of the cover price of the book once all of the costs have been taken off this as well. So a book that I did with Hodder in 2016, we sold over 20,000 copies, and my £4,000 advance is yet to be paid off. So, just to give you a little perspective, well, that's why authors don't make a lot of money. So last year was the 50th anniversary of the Wicker Man film. And one of my many other jobs that got me out of the job that I didn't like is doing a show called Sing Along Wicker Man. And thank you very much. And I thought it would be great to write a book about the Wicker Man for the 50th anniversary. And I approached a couple of publishers, and they said, yeah, we could be interested, but our backlog is about 2.5 years, so we could maybe put it out halfway through 2025. And I thought, we'll have missed the 50th anniversary. Oh, sod it, I'll do it myself. So I had no idea how the book was going to do, but I collaborated with Erica Smith. Erica's not here tonight. Erica's a brilliant, brilliant designer. She's not here tonight because she's Morris dancing, which is so St. Leonard's, isn't it? But anyway, so shout out for Erica, who did this beautiful design. So and the most money that I spent on this book was on Erica, was making sure the book was as beautiful as possible, because I knew I was working with a gifted designer. And if you're going to put your own book out, I'd sort of figure at least, just make it the book that you want to read, even if you think that maybe only 20 or 30 people are going to read it. But we were very lucky last year. There was a lot of publicity around the film. Eliza, who I do the Wicker Man show with, the two of us were invited on things like The Verb on Radio 3. And as a consequence, we sold nearly 1,000 books. And that's the most money I've ever made writing a book. And it's the most niche thing you could imagine, the Sing Along Wicker Man scrapbook, right? So I learned a lesson from this, which is it doesn't matter how niche it is, and it doesn't matter if you self-publish. You can only buy this book off my Bandcamp, which is not even a website for selling books, it's for selling records. But the book has sold really well. So I learned a lesson from it, which is like, make the book that you love, and trust that people will want to read it, and if that doesn't work, then just go out and bloody tell people about it and hope that they will then. Anyway, so that takes us to Outlandish, which is a collection of writings about extraordinary human beings, people that I've been passionate about over the years. I wanted to research and write, and extraordinary journeys as well. And that's largely this collection. It's another collaboration with Erica. And so obviously this book has the story of Marina Abramovich. It has the story of Amanda Fielding. Probably a lot of you don't know Amanda. It's the woman who trepanned herself in the late 60s and then trepanned herself again in 2008, which is drilling a hole in your forehead for mystical reasons, let's say. Now, she's got a great sense of humor because in the 1970s, she ran a campaign, Trepanation for the National Health, which I think is a good one and still could, But the reason why Amanda Fielding is someone that I think needs to be celebrated is because she's the founder of the Beckley Foundation, and this is one of the key organizations in this country that's doing serious research into the potential value of psychedelics for mental health, for depression, for anxiety, for addiction, even for things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. There's promise that these substances can help. So Amanda Fielding is a real pioneer in that. And she's in her mid-80s now, and she's lucid. So, maybe drilling a hole in your head twice, is a good thing. So, also in the book, Paul Robson, for obvious reasons, civil rights campaigner, someone that came over to the UK in the 30s and affiliated with the miners who were striking for better pay and better rights. A nun from the 1960s, Sister Creta Kent, who I love. was one of my heroes. She invented the 60s happening. We think that the hippies and the beatniks and Tim Leary invented the happening. It was a nun from LA. She was obsessed with pop art and obsessed with graphics and fonts and color and advertising and Andy Warhol and John Cage. And she was someone who was genuinely subversive as an artist, where Andy Warhol kind of reflected the commercialized Western world kind of back at us through his art, mass production of things. What Sister Carita Kent did was she took advertising slogans like this one by a gas company, and she subverted advertising back into religious aphorisms. Power Up can be read in many ways. We can't see it in this, but this is a huge piece of art, and there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of text in each of the blocks. And the text ranges from stories from the Bible to lyrics by Lennon or Jim Morrison or the writings of Aldous Huxley or Sylvia Plath. There's a real range of work that she absorbed. She's a real hero. She's an absolutely amazing woman. I don't know why that's there. Oh, well, that would have been. I don't know what that was. And there's a short graphic novel story in there. So there are journeys that I became fascinated with. Werner Herzog, many of you will know, the filmmaker who made a film about a semi-fictionalized version of a story of a rubber baron dragging a boat over a hill. What fascinated me about this was that Werner Herzog's story is more ridiculous and heroic than the actual fictional story that he was telling. His boat was 10 times heavier, and the angle of the hill was much, much steeper, and there were some serious consequences of the making of this film. And close to home, Andrew Cotting, many of you will know, the Hastings filmmaker, who I love Andrew's approach, his kind of humor that he approaches in his filmmaking, taking a pedalo swan from the seafront here up the Thames to protest against the Olympics in 2012 with Ian Sinclair, and then another one where he took a 12-foot inflatable tomb kind of shape of his father around the world to 65 places of significance, because he had a very problematic relationship with his father, and he would, in his words, it was a way of him taking control of that relationship. And I'm going to do a book launch with Andrew a week today in a pub in Hastings, which you're all invited to. And the last one that I'm going to tell you about before I tell you the reason why I told you that story at the beginning, in case you didn't know, Eva Peronovita, her coffin took an 11-year journey around the world. Her mummified corpse took an 11-year journey. So after she died and after she was mummified, she traveled around Buenos Aires in the back of a van. She was hidden in a cinema. She was hidden in somebody's attic. Nobody knew what to do with her body because there'd been a coup, and the new people that took over were like, well, we're not into Peronism anymore, but we don't want to destroy her body because that will cause an uprising. So what do we do with this thing? We don't know what to do with this thing. And eventually they made copies of her mummified corpse and sent that with 3 dummies over to Europe and buried them all in unmarked graves so that nobody would know where the real Evita was. And so for 4 years she was in an unmarked grave in Italy before she ended up on a coffee table in Madrid, which is another story. Anyway, did anyone know the story that I read at the beginning? Nobody? Anyone a Velvet Underground fan? You did, your hands up at the back. You knew it. So what I read you was a very short version of a song, a story called The Gift, narrated by John Cale, the Welsh viola player in the band, but it was written by Lou Reed. And Lou Reed wrote this story in 1964 when he was a student, or he'd been a student at Syracuse University, inspired by Alfred Hitchcock and his TV programs with the dark twist at the end. So he wanted to write a story with the dark twist at the end, which is what he did. Is that how, where's Tim? Is that how long I've been? Get on with it. Yeah, I better get on with it. Okay, so in 1964, someone genuinely decided to travel by crate because of his predicament. And his name was Reg Spier, which was a good name if you were a wannabe javelin thrower from Australia who finds yourself trapped in the UK in 1964, penniless, unable to return home, and wanting to get back for your daughter's first birthday. So what do you do if you're a, kind of have-a-go Aussie? You get a rival javelin thrower who's also a friend to help you construct a crate that you can put yourself inside, but also release from the inside so you could get out. You starve yourself for 5 days. Reg Spiers had worked at Heathrow, so he knew some of the protocol around cargo, and he knew that he could have pay on delivery put on a crate, and he knew that if he had it delivered to Perth Airport, that was where there was the most lax security, and he could sneak out of the shed at night, hitchhike home. What's going to go wrong? So he hides himself away. He has a few supplies in there, including an large empty plastic bottle. I don't know why I chose that picture, but and it's not without incident. So the plane has to stop in Paris. There's problems with fog, and because he'd been out in the hold in the aeroplane and urinated into the bottle and then realized the plane was landing when it shouldn't have been, he put the bottle top of his crate, climbed back in again, sealed himself. French authorities kind of come in and they see this bottle of urine and can't work out why it's there, and then they think, oh, British toilet humour at its most literal. They thought that the guys in Heathrow had just done it as a joke, so they didn't investigate any further. He's left upside down for an hour on the runway in Mumbai in baking heat. He strips naked. He does wonder what will happen if somebody hears him and they open up a crate and find a naked Aussie in there. But he makes it back to Australia, and he hitchhikes home, and he makes it in time for his daughter's birthday, and it costs him next to nothing. And it would have all gone under the radar had he not forgotten to phone his mate in England who'd helped him. And before he'd left, he'd said, I'll give you a ring when I get home. If you don't hear from me, you better contact the authorities. Something's gone badly wrong. He forgets to phone his mate. So his mate phones the authorities and says, this thing happened, right? So Reg Spiers is tracked down by the Australian authorities. And of course, because they're Australians, they just sort of go, good on you, mate. The Prime Minister sends him some money in the post. He's a bit of a hero. Qantas decide not to fine him or make a deal about it, but actually celebrate the story and say we're probably going to tighten security from now on. But so he's a hero, and he's interviewed in the press, and he says, what's the big deal? It's just like sitting in a chair, isn't it? So he's just that classic Aussie, kind of laid back attitude. And the final person in our story enters now, and his name is Brian Robson. And he was a very young Welshman in 1964 who'd signed up to a thing called the £10 POM. And that was, Australia was trying to boost its population, and if you wanted to see what it was like living in Australia, you'd be given £10 and be sent over there, and your passport would be taken away for 2 years. And he thought, well, it's a bit boring in Wales. I'll go and have a big adventure in Australia. And he sort of, dreamed of this beautiful landscape. I don't know, that probably isn't Australia, is it? I don't know where I got that from. But okay, that's probably New Zealand. Anyway, so he's sort of thinking, I'll go surfing, go hang out. So he arrives there, and they station him in sort of, buttfuck wherever in the middle of nowhere. And he's working in a post office, and there's like 3 guys there, and they're all, kind of toothless old gits, eating beans cold out of a tin. That's the only food that they're eating. Within 24 hours, he's really homesick. He realizes he's made a terrible, terrible mistake, but the buggers have taken his passport away for 2 years. And all he can think about is his family, his dog, and that he really, really wants a cheese sandwich, but he can't get any of that because he's just in the middle of nowhere. So he's so desperate, he decides to stow himself away on a liner to New Zealand, but he's not been on a boat before. and doesn't realize that he gets terribly seasick. So he gives himself up within a couple of hours, and he's returned to buttfuck nowhere. And it is at the lowest point in his life now, and he doesn't know what to do. He knows he's not going to make it through these 2 years. And then he reads in the newspaper about this guy called Reg Spiers. And he thinks, aye, how hard could it be, right? So he has a crate made, but he makes a couple of schoolboy errors. The first is, there's no bloody room to move around inside. Okay, he chooses the biggest suitcase, and he has himself nailed in. So he doesn't have this crate made so that he can just sort of pop out and have a wee and then pop back in again. So, or breathe. So he thinks it's going to be a 24-hour trip from Melbourne, I think it is, to the UK. But the plane is diverted because the cargo is too heavy. The plane isn't diverted. Some of the cargo is taken off the plane that he's on, including him. And it's put on another plane which goes via LA. But the worst thing is that his crate is put on upside down in an unheated hold. And it's a 22-hour trip to LA, which isn't even where he wants to go. And it'd be impossible, I think, for us to even imagine the agonizing pain that he went through because he was trapped upside down for 22 hours. And he was close to death when he arrived in LA. And the thing that saved his life was an accident. So when his crate was put on the runway, he fumbled in his pocket. With the last bit of movement he had in his body, he fumbled in his pocket to get a torch and just light a torch, turn it on just to see, it's nighttime, just to see where he is. And he drops the torch, and it alerts some of the officials who are there. Why is there a light on in that crate? And they prise open the front of the crate, and they find what they think is a dead person inside, all curled up. And they pull the body out, and they try and stretch the body straight, and it just coils back into this kind of fetal position because of his predicament. So he's taken to hospital, and he convalesces for about 3 months. The FBI are called, they think he's a spy for some reason, and eventually, when he's able to speak again, he's lost his voice for about a week, and he manages to convince them of his predicament and of the truth of his story. So the FBI say, well, we don't want anything to do with you. We're going to hand you over to Pan Am. Let them decide. So they hand him over to Pan Am, and Pan Am, just like Qantas, go, there's a good story in this. So they give him a first-class ticket back to the UK. And he has, I think the best cheese sandwich he's never had in his life. So those are the journeys that they do. And our story nearly ends there. Maybe our story should end there, were it not for a dark twist. And that dark twist is to do with Reg Spiers. Now, Reg Spiers was an unsuccessful athlete, and so he was fishing around for another choice of career, and he settled on international drug smuggler. And he escaped on 2 occasions, once in India, I can't remember where the second place was, smuggling heroin. If you're going to do it, do it in style. So he gets caught in Sri Lanka, and he gets sentenced to death in Sri Lanka. The Australian authorities intervene, and he's returned to Australia, and he's shoved in a prison cell where he's going to be for many, 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 many years. And somebody decides to make a film about him because they read about his story and go, that is a bonkers story. He smuggled cannabis as well, but he also smuggled, it was the heroin that kind of really nailed him. And 15 years ago, I think it was, Brian Robson decided that he was now at peace with Australia, or he wanted to make amends with Australia, let's say. having had such a traumatic experience there, he thought maybe he would go there with his family for a holiday, knowing that no one was going to take his passport from him when he arrived. And maybe, because if it was us, I'm sure this would have gone through our heads, that maybe you'd want to get in touch with a guy called Reg Spiers, because after all, that guy Reg Spiers kind of saved your life. He got you out of a really difficult, traumatic, depressing part of your life. And if you're going to Australia, you'd probably maybe look him up and say, thank you. You know, you were a hero to me. But the problem was that Reg Spiers was still behind bars. And for two men who had spent over 24 hours in solitary confinement of their own choosing to get from A to B, to escape a predicament that they didn't want to be in, and for Brian to discover that his hero was back in a confined situation and had been for 20 years of his life, may well have been a kind of dark twist to a story worthy of the pen of Lou Reed. Thank you for listening.